Hi, I'm Davie from Games for Families, and this is the third video in my series Great Games for Amazing Kids, where I look at the interaction between special needs, child development and games. Communication is a funny thing. When I'm talking to you now, I'm not just using words, I'm using a combination of eye contact, facial expression and gesture to supplement my words in a kind of form of communication which is known as social communication. But what if I was to talk to you without social communication? Well, I can't. What I'll do is put some text up which will demonstrate. So most of the time, social and verbal communication work together pretty well, but one or other can break down. So very briefly, because it's slightly not really talked about enough, is language problems and language disorder itself. If you have a child who has difficulty with language, I think we have to go back to something I've said a few times, which is that sometimes simply the act of sitting down and learning any game is challenge enough. And as I've said before, if you're challenging somebody and they're achieving that challenge, you are doing them good. And so sometimes you just have to leave it at that. Whatever they can manage in terms of the act of sitting down, understanding the rules, which are usually given verbally, and playing the game may be enough. Now, of course, it's tempting to say, oh, I have a child with language problems. What word games are there? I think that's not going to be a good approach. I don't know. Please let me know if there is an alternative of a cooperative word game. I think there might be a cooperative variant for paperback, but other than that, I don't think there is one. And the idea of being in competition with other people when you have a language problem is like racing a bunch of sprinters when you have a physical disability. It's just unfair. So I don't think that's a great idea. Moving on, though, to social communication. Now, of course, many of you will know the phrase if you have worked with or have a child with an autistic spectrum disorder, and also it goes along with my previous video about social interaction. But it's not just those children. Lots of children can have problems with social communication of various sorts. And so that, as I said, is about the kind of non-verbal, all the bits of communication which aren't just information. So what do we do with those kids? Well, actually, board games can be a really good space for them because actually it's a way of interacting where you not everything is to do with that face-to-face stuff, which can be very stressful. And so actually sometimes games where there isn't that much interaction, where you're all building your own little thing and you just see who's built the best thing, can be a really good way forward. I always go on about this game, but really, if you haven't got a copy of Barren Park, which does this, get a copy of Barren Park. But I want to talk a little bit, so that's all fine. You can find a Euro game or a game with low interaction and then just, again, fall back on the thing. He or she is sitting there coping with being around other people. That's great. But if you want to push things a little bit, if you want to kind of, as I say, challenge and scaffold their skills a little bit higher, I think you've got to delve a little bit into those parts of games which are to do with kind of guessing intentions, dealing with ambiguity, and possibly lying and cheating and bluffing yourself. I don't think you need to plunge them again straight into a heavy, high-stakes social deduction game. That seems to me to be a bad idea, again, because they'll get swamped. But I think you can introduce these things quite relatively gently. So just to think about ambiguity, I think this is rather a good game, and it's very accessible for children. It's called The Chameleon, and essentially what you do is one of you secretly doesn't know what category everyone else is giving a clue to. And so it all turns on the ambiguity of language and how you can interpret the single term in several ways. Now, that can be stressful, but it's a very short game. There's multiple rounds. You will win some, you will lose some. And I think if you have someone with some difficulties, I think they can still cope with this because it's so accessible. So I would consider that. And then we come on to Deceit. Now, obviously some games are all about deceit, but if you think about it, there's quite a lot of games where deceit is an element, but isn't the main game. So I'm thinking of something like Sushi Go. What have they played? And they, before they pass that hand of cards on, or Evolution. Have they turned carnivore? Please go and look up reviews if you don't understand what that means. Those are two really, really good games that I would recommend, and I'll put images down on the screen. I would also want to give a small plug to a little-known card game called Alana's Animals, which is very good for younger children and also involves turning over cards and kind of finding out what's going on. And I think that's an excellent little game. So that is one way of doing things, just to kind of build up slowly into this kind of revealing hidden information. I think that's a really good way to getting into, eventually, to the whole game being about hidden information. But I want to close, just before I make my final 2 points, by talking about a game that really shouldn't be any good for this group, and that is the mind, which I know was, well, the last hotness but one as I'm filming. I think the mind is a remarkable bit of work. It's essentially, if anyone doesn't know, you're basically putting cards down and without verbal communication or telling each other what cards you've got, try and make sure you put your cards down as a team in order. Now, the as a team is crucial here. So this is a game that, as a competitive game for someone with social communication difficulties, would be a disaster. But because it's competitive, you can support them through. You start off with one card, you maybe give them a little bit more help than the rules strictly allow, it's okay, and then to move on from there. The other thing that's fascinating about the mind is that because it's so simple, the experience people have might be kind of similar enough that this could be something that a researcher, a kind of clever and energetic psychology researcher could do a research project on, a study on, to see if you can use this as a therapy tool, because I really think it is that compelling and amazing. Big fan. Do go and have a look at it. But ultimately, I come back to my 2 main messages. If you have someone with social communication difficulties and you can get them to play something that they're enjoying, just play it. You're doing them good. It's being with other people, being in that space, it's good for them. But if you're not having fun with it and they're not having fun with it, put it away, go and do something else. I hope that's been some help to you. Next time we're going to come back and talk about attention. I know, it's going to be tough. I'll see you next time. Bye.